Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about some programming topics. In this video, we'll talk about graphical user interface programming with Python and what the options are and how to get started.
Hi, my name is Jobin, and I'm an open source developer. My channel is called JobinPy, and it's all about Python and Linux. Welcome to JobinPy.
A lot of my viewers, I'm sure, use tkinter or have used tkinter, but there's actually quite a few other options. You know, the interesting thing is, if you're in a room, let's say, full of Python programmers, you might ask some of them, what do you actually use Python for? And every single person in the room will give you like a slightly different answer, most likely. And there's like so many different libraries that you can use with Python, especially with graphical user interface toolkits. I know, like, when I started with Python programming, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to get into desktop application, like graphical user interface type programs, because that's what I've always done, like even before Python. And when I started to look at the options, I was actually overwhelmed. So going back to the example I provided, if you're in a room full of Python programmers and say, hey, do you know Python? And the other person will say, oh yeah, I do. And then it would be like, great. So you know Python, I know Python. Let's chat. Then you'll likely find out that the other person is using a completely different library, or if they're using some libraries that are the same, it's the end result or the main libraries that they're using might be different. For example, in the graphical user interface world, we have tkinter, we have WX Python, we have Kiwi, and we have PyQt, we have Qt for Python, and I'm sure there's more. So right off the bat, there's like so many choices. And I'm not sure if any of you have ever felt overwhelmed when you wanted to choose a graphical user interface toolkit. I know I was. I looked at the options and said, oh wow, like, which one should I go with? Which one's the best? Or which one at least is the best for me? Which one's the best overall? I don't think there is an answer for that, though. It just depends on your use case. With graphical user interface development, if you're trying to create a huge application similar to, say, GIMP or Photoshop or even something greater, then maybe something like PyQt will be able to do the job quite well. If you're creating smaller or mid-sized applications, or mostly just retrieving information from a database and then wanting to show that information from the database on the screen, then tkinter will be more than adequate in most cases, from my experience. Another thing to take into consideration is like whether it's going to be for professional work or for hobby work. And that's actually a question I have for you guys. Do you use tkinter for hobby projects, or is this or do you actually use it in a commercial environment? I'd be interested in knowing. But let's say if you are using or thinking about using a graphical user interface library with Python, if it's going to be for commercial work, you'll have to take your colleagues into consideration. If you have any colleagues to work with, you'll have to see what their skill sets are and have a meeting and try to figure out which toolkit to go with. Like if one person is really good at using PyQt and another person's really good at using tkinter, those two are quite different. I mean, not completely different, but different enough where one of them will have to learn more about the other toolkit to start doing anything useful. So, if it's a hobby project, if you're a solo programmer, you have more freedom, right? You can try things out. You can try whichever toolkit you want and get a feel for it and see which one you like best. So whether it's a hobby project or a commercial project, that's going to be I think a deciding factor as well, especially if you're working with others versus working solo. Another thing to keep in mind is the overall nature of Python, I find, is very open source. I mean, it's a scripting language, so anything that you write is interpreted by Python, which means your Python scripts are essentially open. Anyone else can just view Python source code. It's not compiled to machine language. I think there are ways to do that, if I'm not mistaken. C Python, but I haven't looked into it. But nevertheless, let's say if you're creating a commercial application that needs to be proprietary for some reason, then in a case like that, maybe Python wouldn't be the first choice. Maybe a compiled language like C or C++ would be a more suitable fit. But if it's going to be used as an open source application, then with Python, I think it'll feel right at home, because the overall nature of that programming language is open, and that's actually one of the obstacles I had to deal with when I first started using Python. I came from a proprietary background. That's primarily what I worked on. I'll probably make a video about how that all started and how I got into open source development. But coming from a proprietary background, it was new to me for wanting to share source code. I started learning Python, and then I found out later, it's like, okay, so everything's wide open. Anything I write is like right there. And I stopped and I had to think about it. And then I asked myself, is this the direction I want to go? And sure enough, I think that helped me to overcome my doubts about making my source code available to the public. So yeah, whether it's open source or whether it's closed source, the project that you're working on, Python in general will be a question to ask whether that's the most suitable language for that or not. For me, it certainly is. The next challenge when it comes to developing, desktop applications in Python is distribution. The advantage of creating desktop applications in Python is that it can be cross-platform. And by that, I mean you can write an application that runs in Linux, in Windows, and on Mac OS, which is quite amazing. I used to use a programming language where it was mostly Windows-based, and getting out of Windows to have it run in other operating systems was like a dream. It's something I've always wanted to do, but now with Python, it's available. I can write it for Linux, and then have it run in Linux, have it run on Mac OS, and have it run on Windows, which is great. But distribution is a problem all by itself. Like after you've written your application, how are you going to distribute your application? Is it going to be, in the case of Linux, is it going to be a snap package? Is it going to be a Flatpak? Or is it going to be neither? And for those of you that have never used Linux, it's actually gotten a lot better as far as like application distribution is concerned. It used to be a lot more difficult, where you would have to basically package your application to have it work on various different distributions. It's not like that anymore. Thankfully now we have snap packages and we have Flatpak packages. There's like two options now. And and the whole idea is you create a snap package of your application or a Flatpak of your application, and then you can send those over to the store, like the Snap Store or FlatHub, which is the store for Flatpaks. And then users using various different Linux distributions can download your package and then run it. So it's actually gotten a lot easier. On the Windows side of things, you have a choice of creating an MSI file or an executable file. And there's more options as well, but those are the two more common methods of application distribution. And on Mac OS, I actually have no idea because I haven't actually used a Mac in many years. It was a lot different when I used to use Mac, but that obviously has its own distribution format as well. So from development, right from the beginning, when you're thinking about creating a graphical user interface application, there's like so many things to consider. What language, first of all, and whether it's going to be open source or closed source, which graphical user interface toolkit, which one's the best one to go with for that particular project, and then distribution. How is the end user going to get your application after it's been written? Another toolkit I actually forgot to mention is GTK. So GTK is a toolkit that's really popular on Linux. It is actually cross-platform as well, so you can run GTK on Windows, but it's not easy. I did it myself with OpenResizer, one of my open source applications on Linux. I used GTK to create that application a few years ago. This was before I got into tkinter. I started off on Linux with GTK first. And it was actually not straightforward to, it wasn't straightforward to use on Linux, and it wasn't straightforward to use on Windows. In fact, I got it to eventually work on Windows. Like my application eventually ran on Windows. It ran fine on Linux because GTK is foremost a Linux-based graphical user interface toolkit. But I knew it was possible to run it on Windows, but it was surely a challenge. And even after it ran, it was one of those situations where it ran, and then I was like, okay, now I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm not going to make too many changes, because I was afraid of breaking it. That's how difficult and fragile the whole process was. So I quickly realized that GTK is not a good option for cross-platform compatibility. Although if you have a big enough team, I'm sure you can have some meetings and figure out a way to make it run on a different operating system with some special guidelines. But if it was just me creating the application and wanting it to run on Windows, it was a challenge. From my experience, I've noticed that there's very few professional graphical user interface jobs out there. Like if you're looking for like a Python graphical user interface type job, it's not as many, I find, as what you would find in the Windows world, with .NET, for example. There's quite a few different .NET jobs. When you check on sites like Indeed, there's Windows Forms application development, there's WPF, but if you search for like tkinter, for example, you'll likely find very few results, if any. So that's one of the downsides with open source toolkits, like tkinter, for example, is I don't see it in the professional world, or I haven't heard of it being used in a big professional environment, although I'm pretty sure it's being used in various places, that I haven't heard of. I'm going to have more and more videos about this, about software development in general. That's not geared towards one particular toolkit or even one programming language for that matter, or one operating system. So let me know what you think about these types of videos, and if there's anything that you want to share. I'm curious to know if you actually use tkinter for commercial work, or whether you use tkinter as a hobby. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next video, have a nice day. Thanks for watching.